Hey, I'm producer Tom from Coast to Coast AM. You guys are awesome. Give yourselves a round of applause for coming out. So, the late, great Edgar Mitchell said there is something out there. Whether you believe that or not, we've got a great panel here today that's going to help you decide for yourself. Before we get to the panel, though, we want to bring somebody up. This guy works really hard to put on these kind of events, and he deserves some recognition. Ladies and gentlemen, Jordan Pease. Come on up, Jordan. A few words of wisdom.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you to all my friends here on this panel. Thank you to all our new friends here in Vancouver, British Columbia. It's a great privilege to be able to do these events and put these tremendous people on this stage. I really want to thank all of you for coming to this event today. I hope you can network these messages with your friends and family, colleagues. I want to thank my dear staff here. I'm getting a little teary. Christina Stewart, Laurie Wagner. Out at the table is Abigail Lewis, and Nikki Clifton are the staff we brought up from Oregon to produce this event. Yes, tremendous work. Stand up. Stand up. Tremendous work goes into these events. This is our fourth conference of this series, our fourth year, and I still joke with myself, oh yeah, we'll just send some emails and book a room, and how hard can it be to put these things on, right? Ask Chris. So thank you all for coming again. It's just a real pleasure to be able to produce these events. Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
Hey, Jordan Pease, ladies and gentlemen. So now let's get to your MC for this afternoon. He spent time in the Navy. He's an awesome guy. He's a 3-time Emmy Award winner. You know him probably best as the host of Coast to Coast AM, the national radio show. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Mr. George Noory. George.
Thank you, Tommy. Hello, Vancouver. How are our Canadian neighbors? You know, there isn't a time on Coast to Coast where I don't brag about Canadians. You guys are wonderful, truly. I got my experience in Canada a lot being raised in Detroit because I went to Windsor all the time. That's where I snuck over and got away with a lot of stuff. But let me introduce our great panelists, by the way. Here he is. All of these are experts in ufology, all of them, with specialized interests. Steve Bassett has been looking for disclosure for years. He's going to get it. One of the world's leading authorities on ufology, Richard Dolan. A guy who just hit a home run on Coast to Coast, and he's an expert on alien abductions and other weird cases, Jonny Enoch. Now that Stanton Friedman is somewhat retired, the new father of ufology, Grant Cameron. And our constitutional lawyer and expert in disclosure, Daniel Sheehan. I get to stand during this event? So, 2 extraterrestrials landed on the moon. The first place they went was to a bar. They lasted 2 minutes. Why did they leave? They said it had no atmosphere. Oh, well. And I'll tell you one other great story about Richard Dolan. One heck of a guy. And I don't want to make fun of this issue, but it'll tell you just how great a guy this guy is. On his way into Vancouver from his home city, he was in a limousine. And as he was coming down the road, the driver stopped at a red light, and Richard looked out his window and saw a family on their knees eating grass, a mother, father, and 2 kids. Now, this affected Richard so much, he told the limo driver to stop immediately, and he rolls down his window. Richard had a big cigar, and he was puffing out the window. These people are looking at him. And Richard said to the father, you sir, what are you doing? they're on their knees eating grass. And the father said, "Sir, we haven't eaten in 3 days. We're starving." This affected Richard so much, he invited them all into his limo and said, "Tonight you dine with me. My grass is this high." That's the kind of guy Dolan is, folks. During the panel, we're going to take your written questions that Tom and Lori have gotten you, if some of you have sent them in. But I want to start with Steve Bassett as we talk about ufology and disclosure and what we expect over the next few months to a year. Last night in the restaurant, somebody stopped me and said, "There's going to be disclosure by 2020. I guarantee it." So, Stephen, let's start with you, my friend. Where do you see this headed?
It's been a rather up and down 16, 18 months. The disclosure process has been interrupted before. The 9/11 event had a huge impact on it. I think the financial crisis that began in early 2008 definitely set it back. But things are looking extremely favorable during the election campaign, and we had the Clintons having to address the issue publicly and what have you, repeatedly, and 400 articles were written in major newspapers. And I think she was going to disclose. So at that point, I was extremely optimistic. That didn't happen, obviously. She did not win the election, and that altered the playing field. However, something else happened, which is the most important thing right now in the disclosure field, and that is that the military intelligence complex, knowing that the Clintons were now having to speak to the issue in the campaign repeatedly, the articles were out there, and she was the leading candidate, almost certain to win, made a decision to take a proactive move. And they actually put together a program behind the scenes in 2015 to come out, literally, into the field. And when the election went the other way, they stepped back for about 11 months, but they announced the program October of last year, and that was the To the Stars Academy, which has a front team that is virtually all insiders with super high clearances, career CIA, DOD, skunk works that works. So right now, the military intelligence complex is leading the disclosure movement, which I never thought I'd ever say in my lifetime. And they can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. They've already released gun camera footage. There's more footage coming. They're starting to take some other measures. And while this political storm in the United States is raging, they've been doing some things behind the scenes. So if the military intelligence complex has made the decision that we are going to become part of the solution, and they have actually come forward with 30 people still inside backing them up, it is my view that when the political storm in the United States finally subsides over the next 5-6 months, that things will pick up speed very quickly, and we see disclosure next year. And there's also the possibility that another nation, sensing that we're getting very close, may jump in the race and grab the prize. And of course, the leading candidate is Putin. So I'm very optimistic for next year, and that's my feeling.
Do you think it'll be done on the United Nations level, or is it going to be individual countries?
No, United Nations has been decimated by the Security Council states. It made it into a nearly useless organization. Hell, they can't even keep the building up. Nations can't come together to do this because the process would leak almost immediately. Right? So it's going to be a single country, a head of state, acting very suddenly, very quickly, and it'll be like that. And then the other heads of state will very quickly follow suit. I mean, that's how I think it'll happen. I could be wrong, but I feel good about that scenario.
How many of you have seen the video that was just released of the pilot off the coast of California who videotaped a 2004 episode of an object that he radioed back and said, "I wish I were flying this. This thing is so fast, I can't keep up with it. It's unbelievable." I don't know what it is. Have any of you seen that? It's truly remarkable.
Yeah.
Truly remarkable. Richard Dolan, where are we headed with this?
Hi, George. Great to see you, by the way. I've been a proponent and a believer in disclosure for many, many years, and I do believe it's going to happen. I don't know about 2020. Stephen and I have had debates about this for the last 18 years, I believe. Privately, but And Steve is always, it's going to happen. And I'm like, I don't really think so. So I think I'm actually in the lead on this debate on a yearly basis. I just want to say that, Stephen. But I hope to be seeing a score on your side because I want it to happen. The real thing is if it's going to happen by the U.S., then that means that the Trump administration's presumably going to be behind it. And I don't really have a good read on what he thinks about this and what his people around him think. And furthermore, I've not yet seen the motivation for letting it out, at least immediately. There is a drip happening. I think the way it is like, every decade there's a new revelation about this that comes out. Back in the 1970s, we had the Freedom of Information Act era, and that actually, you would have thought back then would be enough to kind of blow this open, and yet it wasn't. All these government documents coming out that had been denied for years, and then suddenly here they are, and still like nothing. And then there was a movement, rumblings and rumors in the 1980s. Grant earlier talked about the mid-1980s, but there were rumblings in the late 1980s and the early 90s, and that didn't happen. Then there were rumblings leading up to Stephen Greer's press conference in 2001, and it didn't happen. And then there have been rumblings throughout. There were allegations that President Obama was going to disclose in 2009, and then 2010, and then 2011, and then 2012, and it didn't happen. So I'm used to being let down on this. But every time there are new revelations, it pushes things forward just farther enough so that you have to wonder how much farther can they push it before they can't go back. And now you have the New York Times and the Washington Post, the corporate media, coming out last December about the ATIP program and the Tic Tac UFO that you mentioned. And we're at a new level now, and they can't really walk back from that. No, they can't. So I think we are inching closer and closer toward some kind of transformation. And the real question to me, and I don't have the answer to this, is how much control will these people be able to maintain over this narrative? In other words, will they be able to keep it so that, this is a threat? We don't really know much about it. Or are they going to admit to things like Roswell? Are they going to admit to 70-plus years of a cover-up? Because we're really not there yet. We're not there in the mainstream media with a really true complicity and an acknowledgement of the depths of this cover-up. And this is a deep cover-up. So when they get to that point, that's a situation that can just go right out of control. And I don't know. If they are able to control that narrative to that extent and follow that famous CYA rule to the extent that they don't have any real blowback, then that's a sad day, because that means they've got complete control over the media narrative, and I don't want to see that.
Well, is this thing on? Richard, my suggestion is don't sweat the details of disclosure. Just concentrate on what it's going to do for your book sales.
Just one big party.
All right. They're going to go to the moon, okay? You're going to be taking cruises in the Mediterranean with your wife. So, just
All right.
chill.
So, long story short, George, I actually think we're inching toward it. I don't know how and when. I don't know the specifics and mechanics, but I think we're getting closer and closer.
How do they explain why they lied to us for so many years?
That's not. They're going to do it by defending themselves. They'll say, "We believe it's a threat. We didn't know how to explain this. We didn't know how to tell the public. We didn't want to disrupt the social order." I mean, there's all kinds of explanations that they can have, and some of them might be totally legit. Some of them might be true, and others, I'm sure, will be very self-serving.
Jonny Enoch, you have looked at a lot of alien abduction cases in your career. What are you seeing these days?
What am I seeing these days? I'm seeing that the ET, what we would call abduction cases, are more of your contact cases. People that had negative experiences with abductions before, when they would go on saying that, they had this terrifying experience of being taken up into a UFO and, having these beings that were scaring the hell out of them. I think that they just misunderstood it, phenomenologically. So I think that there was an interfacing process going on through the years to condition us to be the architects of the new paradigm, that we are part of the disclosure measures. Because relating to the last question that you just asked, I don't put a lot of faith in our governments being involved with the disclosure process. I like the Buddhist teaching that there's three things that can't be hidden for long: the moon, the sun, and the truth. And I think that we need to be the disclosure movement, and that comes from our ET contactees.
I think you're right. I don't think disclosure will come from government directly.
From
Go
everyone
ahead,
here.
clap for him. There you go. Last year or so on Coast to Coast, David Wilcock, you all know David, said that he was convinced that President Obama was at the time going to reveal the extraterrestrial presence and that he was going to be flanked by 2 aliens. And I said, David, no, it's not going to happen.
Thank you. Thank you, George.
Grant
Thank you.
Cameron, what keeps you going? You don't stop.
Down the rabbit hole, you can't get out. You just keep going. I like to do the consciousness, but I have a lot of contacts in this present story, and I keep following them. And to answer your first question, what do I think is coming? I have a lot of people. Semi-Van is still talking, and I have a source who told me a lot of the stuff in the beginning that turned out to be true. He says there's big stuff coming. If you look just in the last couple of days, they're talking about the Senate Appropriations Committee is interviewing all the people from the Nimitz. So I think you're going to have appropriations. You're going to have the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee are going to deal with this, and I think that's what they did when they released in December. I always said they fired the UFO community. They didn't come through us. They went through the major media to put pressure on Congress, and it sounds like Congress is going to do something. They're going to at least interview these people. I hear there's 2, I have a guy in Hollywood who's confirmed to me that there are 2 2 projects coming from Tom DeLonge through Hollywood, and there's another book coming up by Tom DeLonge. They've got the 24 videos. I think Richard had heard as well that they have more than 3 in their possession right now. But I think it's still good to me. It's always going to be this slow drop one, drop another, in 2 months, drop another one, and just keep dragging it out. Because Tom DeLonge said right from the word go, the story would unfold in 6 books. So they're only at book number 3 coming out. You've got 3 books more to read before his version of what's going on is told. So for him, it's an advantage to sort of drag it out. And for the government, I always maintain that if they want to disclose, they can stand up and disclose. And they're not doing that. They're doing this acclimatization thing. And they did it in December. They said UFOs are real and we're investigating them. And nothing happened. There was no panic. There was no questions. They got away with it.
And you've heard the name Tom DeLonge come up several times already. He is a former rock star with the group Blink 182, who put all his money together and then put a group of people together and decided this is what he wants to do. He wants to work on UFO disclosure. So he jumped in a big way to do this. Steve Bassett, without Tom DeLonge, were we still going to be getting the answer we're going to be getting eventually? Did he just speed things along? What happened?
Let me be delicate here.
Don't be.
People will often say, so-and-so made history, or Abraham Lincoln made history. You don't make history. History comes to you. And the question is what you do when that happens. Tom DeLonge was knocking on doors for some time because he had an idea. And what happened is, because of the developments with the Clinton election and all the coverage and the statements they were forced to make, the people inside the military intelligence complex had a problem, and he showed up one more time, and they opened the door and said, let's talk, because their idea was similar to his. And they also knew that if they were going to launch their program, they couldn't have one of their own being the head person, right? CEO is a former CIA director of intelligence for the Antarctic or whatever the hell. No. They needed a front person, somebody that was likable, somebody that maybe even could address the millennials. And there was Tom, all on fire with money, able to move, able to do a lot of things, because they weren't going to pay for it, and the government wasn't going to pay for it. And so history arrived at Tom DeLonge's door, and he ran with it. He worked it really hard. What I'm trying to say is that Tom DeLonge did not select the people to come out to do this program. They selected him. to be their front person and to be the CEO of the To the Stars Academy. And he is, in that sense, a spokesman for the overall project. But Luis Elizondo is principally the spokesperson for the team. It's what the team says and does that matters. But again, there's always Tom there who can sort of talk to the general public. And the only reason there hasn't been more of that is that the political situation in the United States is unprecedented. It's as bad as I've ever seen it. And I think one of the reasons that they have slowed things down, it's not just another drip, drip, drip disclosure thing so much as they do not want this thing to come to a head until there's been a resolution of the current political situation. And that resolution, in their view, means that the current president will no longer be in office. And they're probably calculating no later than February of next year. I tend to agree. And so you're going to see an extraordinary political developments in the United States. You're going to see a nuclear bomb go off, basically, a political nuclear bomb. We're already seeing things we've never seen before. It's going to get even worse, and it will resolve. And then in the aftermath of that, they can speed things up again. Because, as I said before, their real problem is not us, it's not me. It's Putin, right? Putin has been jerking our chain, running us around in circles, making fools of us because, we've given Russia a hard time. We're trying to start another Cold War. And Putin has always had the ability to pull this whole thing right out from under us and go in front of the Russian people and say there's extraterrestrials here. And he will get all the glory and the greatest political legacy in history, and we will get all of the grief. Right? Can you imagine being the president or the CIA or military people and the press is coming to you, you didn't tell us? Why didn't you tell us? Putin told us? Right? And Putin goes to the front of the stage, and the United States is just sitting there holding the bag. That is a major problem for them, which I've been reminding them of for 20 years. And that's why they cannot put this indefinite. They're caught between Putin and Trump, and they're trying to work this out. And if you pay real close attention, which I have, you kind of see them working it out. This is a very complex, extraordinary thing. What's going on with the Two Stars Academy is historic at the grandest levels. This marks the first real effort now, not a partial, a real effort by the military intelligence complex to move to resolve this issue so they can move on and we can move on. They're now on our side, at least a significant group inside. They haven't been stopped. They haven't been interrupted. The news is piling on. The news is joining up. And if it were not for this political storm, we would be way down the line. So
How does it
I feel very
happen
strongly
that the U.S. national military intelligence community complex have become the good guys? That's what it sounds like.
I'm not. What it is, they want to be
Like,
seen.
when did this happen?
They want to be seen as the good guys. Look, if Clinton had taken the office and announced the extraterrestrial presence, which he planned to do, what do you think was going to happen? Well, the press is going to rush over to the Pentagon. Why didn't you say something? What's going on? And the politicians will be saying, look, it's not our fault. The Pentagon is the reason. They wouldn't tell you. The CIA locked it all up. They hid all these programs. They're awful, and they're going to throw them all under the bus. They knew that was going to happen. And so they didn't have a lot of options, but one of them is to get out in front of the issue before that event takes place. Show that you're trying to be part of the problem, a solution, not the problem. Release information. And Tom DeLonge said that in his interview to George Knapp. He said, I went to these guys and I said, look, this is not going right. You need to be releasing information. You guys have been defending the country. You're the good guys. So let's show the public that you're the good guys. He literally said this to George Knapp. The thing is, many things, but one of the things it is, it's a PR operation, public relations, for the military intelligence complex to try to get a better position as history is racing at it like a train. And I'm not saying it's optimal. It's not like they're going to get a lot of grief. They are. But one thing's for sure, the amount of grief they're going to get compared to what would have happened if they'd taken no action and Clinton had disclosed, if Putin discloses before this goes much further, is incalculable. It will be a geopolitical disaster for the United States. Let me tell you, it will be not good.
Could be kind of cool for the world. Just saying.
No, understand.
Could be kind of a good thing for the entire world.
I don't care who discloses. Actually. Believe me. I'm simply saying, I'm speaking in a fairly nonpartisan way, it's a geopolitical disaster for the United States. That's fact, right?
But if somebody, look, I went to Moscow in May and I gave a long interview to one of their national networks in which I talked about Putin disclosing. Nobody had ever done this before. I was on Russian soil, on Russian media, right? And so basically, this was my way of telling the White House, guys, I'm telling you, if Vladimir is not on your payroll, if he's not getting a check from the CIA every month, then you need to consider him the disclosure president at any moment. It could happen tomorrow. This is serious stuff. The difference between Russia being the disclosure First Nation and us has very significant consequences for the world. The United States is already going down a crapper. This is just going to accelerate the process, right? But long term, it doesn't matter. Long term, as long as we're in the post-disclosure world, I don't care who does it. In fact, I would kind of think it was cool if a very young, dynamic, very attractive guy who wears, I think, quality socks were to be the disclosure president, right? Because this is a nation of peace. This is a nation with a great reputation that people love. And so I think it'll be received very well, and Justin will have tons of years to enjoy the incredible legacy that he will get. Please inform him of that. I'd be happy to talk to him at any time.
Does he wear? Does he wear interesting socks?
The only difference is that if Justin's the disclosure prime minister, he'll probably dress up like an alien if they visit us.
Daniel, let's pull you in on this, and let's get your input on just what you've heard from the other four.
Well, I think that the process of it's clear that there are elements inside the national security state bureaucracy that's been engaged in this long, protracted process of revealing pieces of this, such as Grant addressed today and others have down the years, that there's always been this mixture of leaking things out and kind of slowly feathering into the culture the reality of this extraterrestrial presence. I think that the newest item is the space-based telescopes, as I touched upon, that with the space-based telescopes now being able to actually identify the planets around and find more and more of these Earth-like planets. I mentioned one time before, I think the first thing they're going to do is they're going to announce that they're finding water on some of these planets. Now, they found water on the moon, they found water on Mars, they found, which they didn't think was there. They're going to start finding water on some of these other planets through the spectroscopic analysis of their atmospheres. And then they're going to eventually discover some kind of evidence of primitive life in the sea, so, probably under the water of some distant moon on some distant planet, because of finding carbon dioxide or something or oxygen coming out of the water, and that it's a pincher movement. That process of slowly finding more and more complex life on one planet after another is going to be coinciding with this thing with To the Stars Academy and the National Security State, and they're going to come together at a point where they're first going to recognize life. There's some type of primitive sentient life, a primitive primates on some planet. But of course, they're so far away, you don't have to panic about it. They're not really here. And I think they're going to do just like what the Obama administration did with the weapons of mass destruction and stuff with the W. Bush administration. They just said, oh, well, let's not look back on things. Let's not blame anybody, no recriminations. Let's just look forward and address this thing now. That's what's going to happen. I think it's going to happen over the next 10, 15-year period. And it's going to just slowly bring it into place. I think that's what's
Steve
going to
will
happen.
be 95 when there's disclosure.
Yeah, it's that they're planning it for like one whole lifetime, and it's been 74 years or something like that, 73 years since Roswell. They just smooth it out over a period of one whole lifetime, and so there they are. We're gone by one whole lifetime, and then all of a sudden the world is completely different.
I just have to say that whole thing presupposes, this is my biggest fear, that they have such total control over the global media process.
Yeah.
It's like, just like live in the Soviet Union. You might as well.
No, I think
because
they
they'll
do.
completely block out all of the narratives with such total confidence. And the scary thing is they might be able to do that.
Oh, no, I think they
what
can.
You're saying.
I think they can. I think that the fact that board of
Not
editors.
as
of the
long
New York-
as you
the-
folks are around,
Well,
and we've got our radio show, it ain't going to happen.
Well,
That's the thing.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, until you put on an extraterrestrial being who's on the show and says, "Here I am," that they've been able to handle it. People who've had the direct encounters have been on radio and television. They've talked about it. It's all part of them letting us participate in the Disclosure Project. It's all an attempt to prepare. You got to understand that back when Betty and Barney Hill first had their experiences, the experience of actually being in the presence of one of these extraterrestrial beings was cellular terrifying to people. I mean, our whole millions of years of biological evolution had trained us, to respond to some kind of thing that's completely, totally foreign to our whole experience. Our whole body just has kind of an autonomic nervous system response of fear to the people. And that's slowly dissipating as time goes on over all these years. And I think that in one whole lifetime of 100 years, if they've been able to come from nobody believing it at all to everybody accepting it as, oh, well, we've always known that, that's this process. It could go faster, but I think that this process of discovering the planets one after another and finding more and more complex forms of life on the planet, it's clear that the church is there. I mean, the Catholic Church is right there. They've plighted their troth with having that be a process that they're going to participate in.
Well, they've already said that
Yeah.
believing in extraterrestrials doesn't negate one's belief in God. So
Yeah.
they're already backing that up.
No, they're active. In fact, Jose Gabriel Funes, the former director of the Pontifical Observatory, is now officially teaching a course at the Jesuit University in Argentina on the philosophical and theological implications of contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. So they're doing it. And so when you see that kind of indicia going on, and this stuff with the New York Times and the Pentagon, there's a process going on right now. In 10 to 15 years, it may seem glacial to us, but the fact is that's a fairly smooth transition if we can get it to happen within that period of time. And I think that's what's going to happen. It's a pincher movement, I think, with those two factors.
The late physicist Stephen Hawking said, "Be very careful letting them know where we are." His concern was that they're not all great and nice and that they could do some very evil, harmful things to us.
Yeah, but they've got a pretty good idea we're here. I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, with all the evidence of them being here and the ships and everything like that, it's quite clear that they're here. So that horse is already out of that barn. I mean, so
What if one of the reasons, though, Daniel and Richard and Stephen and Grant and Johnny, that they don't tell us is because there is something very evil going on here. The David Jacobs theory that it's very, very evil, that they're abducting people, they're killing people, they're experimenting with people. And if our government came out and told us all that was happening, there'd be widespread panic.
Well, I'm glad David's retired to get that kind of nasty energy out of the field. The bottom line is it's absolutely obvious that the overwhelming majority of contacts that people have had with the beings have been generally benign, other than this kind of instinctual initial fear. I think that that there's right-wing reactionaries that are all the time trying to figure out the worst possible thing. It is true that there are a number of activities, significant activities that the extraterrestrial beings seem to have been engaged in. They're contrary to our particular mode of ethical reasoning. But as we talked about at the table the other night, our human family has been doing horrible things to chimpanzees and gorillas and other more primitive life forms, for many, many years. We still knock animals dead and eat them. So that the fact that they may be insensitive to some of our concerns, very serious ones. Especially I think the most offensive one is the involuntary impregnation of women and the harvesting of hybrid children. I think that is extremely insensitive. But I don't share the view that they're killing people and and hanging them up on posts and like like those terrible sessions they had in the X-Files, you know, discovering underground caverns where they're, you know, eating people, and you know, those things are just paranoid, delusional aspects of our human family. I think that we have to be prepared to deal with these beings in a regular diplomatic process, as we've experienced among the various factions of our human family. I think we need to be prepared for that and not go sharing and spreading these boogeyman stories around. I think it's just for press that people are engaged in that kind of activity.
How about we get great ratings on Coast to Coast with this, Dan?
I will. I'm going to respectfully disagree a little bit with Danny. I love Danny, but I'm going to respectfully disagree with you. And about 25% of all contact experiences are described as negative. About 3/4 are described as positive. So you're generally right, but there is a significant minority. Now, that doesn't mean that all negative experiences are the result of evil aliens.
Right.
It's totally true. But it's also, you know, the case that these other beings, whatever they are, like, they don't think like we do. They're not like us. And we do react at a visceral level. There's a kind of fear factor response that a lot of people have, and it's not necessarily the ET's fault, but it is the fact that we have a problem with them, and we may always have a problem with them in one way or another, and they may not be sympathetic creatures. They may not have emotional reactions the way we do, and I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, except to say that you know, to just embrace everything with open arms and say it's all wonderful. I think we still want to keep our thinking caps on here and just be able to assess the situation cautiously before we're about to go into the new galactic community, whatever this is supposed to be.
I think Marshall Summers, I would recommend that people take a look at a lot of Marshall Summers' writings of his books. That he's a fellow that's just recommending we be very level-headed about this. We approach the beings, you know, much like we've approached other different civilizations that we've encountered them in our human family. Be realistic and pragmatic, but not demonize them and not project onto them all types of evil. I just think we need to be very careful and cautious, but optimistic about what we have in store for our family.
Johnny, you look like you're ready to say something. Jump in.
Oh, you know, I keep thinking about the stories of Charles Hall and his incredible stories of encountering the tall whites. You know, when he was meeting with the tall whites, this was very interesting. He was doing these sort of weather experiments, and this was over by Nevada, if you guys are not familiar with the story. When he was meeting with them, these beings that were landing, they had all kinds of interesting requests for the Sears, clothes out of the Sears catalog and paint-by-number books and strange things like that. But he had to approach them with caution and a certain amount of respect. And they were cautious about us. They took a more pragmatic approach to us, because when you look at us from the outside, it's just like Daniel was saying. Look at us. We're killing each other. We're starting wars. We're polluting our rivers and our oceans. We're absolutely barbarous sometimes. So you had to approach them with caution. Sure, these beings rode around Vegas gambling and doing all kinds of interesting things, according to him. But if you crossed them the wrong way, they would take like a stun pen kind of thing and knock you out, because, you know, the relationship was still building. So I think, interpretation comes before understanding. We're still getting to know each other in this relationship.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I think we got to distinguish between a discussion in this room about what the aliens are, what we're going to do, and the people who are running the show. As I said in my lecture, they are going to play the threat card. Let me guarantee you they're going to do it. If you take a look at Donald Trump or the U.S. military, that's the job. That's what it's all about, and they're going to basically make the decision. You can even see in Canada, we know that we're demonized. Like, say, we're the bad guys, and they're saying all sorts of stuff about us, and it's like that's sort of like the last straw. That, you know, if you can make Canadians evil, you can make anybody evil, and it's to the military advantage to have a threat. If there's no threat, that's why the appropriations and all the appropriations in armed services is looking at this, because that's where the money is. Unless they identify this thing as a threat, and I said 1%, it's going to be like 50% of the Americans are going to say, I mean, this is worse than Mexicans. I mean, we've got to shoot these people down. And so we're not going to make the decision. We've got to worry about what the people who have the power are going to do how they look at the situation.
We're going to separate alien babies from their parents. Watch.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. Look, I'm going to respectfully disagree with Grant here. Again, I'm following everything that the To the Stars is saying and doing and what have you. Look, when Harry Reid
pressured the Pentagon to create a, quote, UFO study, which they needed like they needed a hole in the head.
$20 million.
$22 million over 5 years. That won't even buy the trash can liners for the Pentagon. And so they didn't want to do that. They've been studying the ET issue for 70 years without stop. They don't need it. But he wanted a public study, and they had to do it because he was the Senate Majority Leader. Okay, fine. So they said, okay, fine. He put the money up, and so they had to create a program, and it was relatively secret, but it wasn't black. Now they're going to operate this program out of the Pentagon. They weren't going to call it the Kumbaya Alien Introduction Program. It had to kind of fit into the genre, so they called it the probably, I think the initial name might have been or probably was the ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, so that anybody looks at it, okay, it's appropriate. They're kind of embarrassed in a sense. They were in a tough spot. They did not want to do that program. And so because they called it that doesn't mean that that was in fact how they viewed it. If you look at what they're saying, they are not referring to these extraterrestrials in any way as a threat. Even when they're talking about the Tic Tac or the gun camera footage events where they can maneuver around the craft, they don't say, well, they could have shot them down at any time. No, they're not doing that. I am well, look, the threat issue must always be something we need to think about, right? However, right, the last thing we want to do is create a threat that isn't there. And there's a lot more, how would you say, a capital to people pushing that issue, right? Than saying, look, let's be reasonable, it could be just fine. And so the internet is going to make sure that the threat thing is always going to have a higher profile. And all I can say is I invite people to try to pay as close attention to what they're doing and what they're saying and what comes next and everything else. And if they're not seeing that kind of profile, a threat profile, then say so. Let's not get carried away here.
Let me just add one thing. You said Tom DeLonge is the spokesman for the military people.
He's a spokesman to the general public.
To the general public. His statement is, UFOs are bad news, get used to it. He proposed on the Jimmy Church show that they use nuclear weapons to bring them down out of high atmosphere.
He did?
Yes.
He did.
Yeah. And
That-
just like Luis Alejandro, he specifically said when he was asked about it, he said, look, this whole program is like this. You go to bed at night and you lock all your doors and lock all your windows, and you get up in the morning and you find dirty boot prints across the rug in your living room. Something's wrong here. We need to find out what it is. We don't know where those dirty boot prints came from, but we know that there's some problem. So the whole thing is being put forth in the kind of a threat mode. It's kind of appealing to people's lower chakras of fear in defense. So
when you're
I
a hammer,
think
every problem is a nail. And
that's right.
The Pentagon.
That's right. And so you look at where all these people come from. All of them are from national security state infrastructure. They've got CIA, NSA backgrounds. They've been dealing in this for like 30, 40 years, these people. Sure. And the reality is that they're going to present this in a threat mode. And the biggest danger of this entire program is the fake false flag that we're being invaded by an extraterrestrial civilization. It's the absolute dream of the national security state, to postulate that type of a threat and suppress free speech, suppress, opposition, increase the massive military budget. You got to understand, they think completely bureaucratically in this thing. And so what we have got to do is we've got to be able to counter that by having a very aggressive, realistic, a pragmatic approach to this. And as I say, Marshall Summers' approach is just approach it like any other diplomatic contact with another unknown civilization. That's what we've got to do. Not be Pollyannish. We're not into the George Adamski type of dynamic here. What we're doing is saying this is a realistic thing. It's a next step in our evolution. We've got to reach out and have contact with the people. And remember, the bottom line is it's still in the hands of the extraterrestrial beings themselves. Right. I mean, they can, in fact, come out and call any of us up here on the panel to have a discussion with them whenever they want to. Call George Noory. And George will sing for them. He'll present our best face.
That'll get them to leave.
That's right. Yeah, right. So we always have to keep that in mind. Is that when and if they decide that the time is appropriate to reach out and to establish this relationship, they will do so. We just need to be prepared for it. We need to help prepare our people by answering these fundamental questions about what we think of ourselves and how well we can assist in raising up the consciousness of our human family to be prepared for this, so we don't have this kind of instinctive, reactive, fear-filled kind of reaction that's going to feed the desires of the Pentagon. That's what we've got to do, I think.
I just want to
Can anybody confirm that Tom DeLonge actually said on Jimmy Church that we need to take nukes and blow them out of the sky? Did this actually happen? Because I want to hear it, Grant. I need to hear that interview.
I'll send
Jimmy
you- I'll
fills
send
in
you a
for
clip.
me when I take a Friday off.
Yeah.
But he did not say it on Coast to Coast, so it may have been Jimmy's.
Because if this
show.
did not happen, then that particular meme needs to be nipped in the bud right now. And if it did happen, then I'm going to review it, and I'm going to probably post about it. Tom is not exactly a genius. He's a smart guy. He's an autodidact, but he's no genius, and he's not an insider. He's a rock guy, and he's said a couple of things which are kind of off. He gets growling, he talks, he's even acknowledged that. He gets too glib. So, if he said that, that's a concern. I'm concerned, I'm focusing on what Elizondo says, what Semivan says, what Justice says, what Christopher Mellon says, and they're not saying things like that. But they're
hold on.
operating in a way that's...
Call Jimmy now. Call Jimmy and see if you
call.
get him on.
I mean, they're having to operate within certain protocols.
And ask him if DeLonge talked about nuking extraterrestrials. And put him on a speakerphone and bring him up and tell him he's going to be on a speakerphone.
This is a debate
know
that
if you
could
get
get
it.
quite fierce. This is serious stuff. All right. This isn't a hobby. This is serious stuff. And the
Apparently, he said, take the ETs out with nukes.
take them down with nukes.
That he may have said it on
high
Jimmy's show. So if he
the high
did, let's get
understand.
Jimmy on, put it on a speaker, and let's put his
There's no
microphone to your
question
phone.
that there are still people within the military intelligence complex that do not want disclosure. Somehow, this group was able to make this maneuver. They must have gotten some clearance and some kind of leeway. And if you look at what they're doing, they're very careful. They never say extraterrestrial. They're not releasing any classified material. They're getting approval. They're not breaking any non-disclosure oaths. They're having to stay careful here because they don't want to lose whatever backing they have within the Pentagon. This makes total sense. They're not going to just run out in the street and go, the extraterrestrials are here. And so they're acting in a way that's, that's consistent.
We've got you. Tell him
Turn on my mic, guys.
tell him he's before a crowd here.
Jimmy, you're going to be live in a second with about 150 people in a room at a panel, okay?
Not just people, Canadians.
What panel?
I need my mic. Okay, it's on. Okay. So, Jimmy, say something.
Testing.
Okay, that's all I need. Okay, so here's the question. This is a yes or no question. Did Tom DeLonge, because it's up for debate here, did Tom DeLonge on your show say that we should take out the ETs with nukes?
I don't remember that.
That's what we needed to know.
Okay, thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks, Jimmy. Say bye to everybody.
Okay.
Say bye to everybody.
What is up, everybody? How you doing?
Have a great Saturday, buddy.
That would have been Jimmy's last night on Coast to Coast if he had said that. Right?
Thanks, guys.
Sorry, Jimmy. Well, maybe that clears that part of it up. But let me ask the question. Should we be so naive? Look how hateful this planet is generally to humanity. If the primordial soup that created life is the same throughout the universe, teeming throughout the universe, isn't it reasonable to assume that this quirk that's in us that creates this hatred and bitterness and evil and greed and all the bad things, that it's in them too?
I love that question. May I answer that?
Yes, you may.
I think there's a great fallacy that has been in this field for many, many years, as long as I've been involved, which goes something as follows. They are so advanced, they've solved the problem of space travel, they've clearly worked out the problem of how not to destroy themselves. And I just keep thinking, if we were to go back in time to ancient Greece or some other ancient society with our iPhones and our nice technology and all of our scientific knowledge and our nice clothes, they would look at us and think, wow, those people are so advanced. They must have solved all of our socioeconomic political problems. And we would just be looking at each other like, don't say anything, because we would know. I mean, there have been lots of societies that have had...
Dolan would be saying Cleopatra's hot.
There have been all kinds of societies that have had leading-edge technology for their time. Famously, the Germans, the Nazis did, and now the United States. That doesn't make them nice people. That doesn't mean that they're not super aggressive. So with other species, why can't there be interstellar economic hitmen out there? I mean, in other words, not that they're even bad or evil, not that we're bad or evil. We just are what we are. You know, we're creatures that are trying to just grab resources. And I don't really see there's any intrinsic reason, excuse me, why another species wouldn't be doing the same. And even if they're not out to wipe us out, their presence here might be beneficial for us or it might not be beneficial for us. And so I just think it's a fallacy to assume that they're all going to be out there to help us out and bring us to the next dimension, density, or whatever it is. I don't see any reason to believe that.
You have filled out some questions.
Sporadic applause.
Did you write out some questions? Tommy, tell us what you've done with the questions.
Guys, they're right here. Okay, so we'll just go down the line.
We have some other people who still have questions, right?
Bring them on up to the table, guys.
Bring
if
them,
you do.
drop them off at the table, and Tom will read them.
Okay, so we're going to start with Steve Bassett. Hello, guys. There's a panel going on.
Yeah, I think we do.
Steve?
What?
Yeah, you ready?
What?
We're going to start with you.
My fault.
Oh, okay.
The question is, will the secret space program help us and lead us to disclosure?
Well, it depends on which secret space program you're talking about. Because you see, we've always had a military space program that operated under classified orders, right? Clementine was part of that. But the secret space program is one hell of a meme. What can I say? It's super cool. And as a result, a lot of people have taken that meme and run with it real far. And so you've got all kinds of secret space programs. We've got fleets apparently cruising around star systems. We've got massive bases on the other side of the moon. We've got people being age regressed and this and that and everything else. I don't have a lot of confidence in any of that. I think we have a classified space program, and I think it's very possible they are operating with anti-gravitic craft because there's decent evidence that we worked it out. Maybe not able to fit it into a saucer, but into maybe a triangle. And if we have anti-gravitic craft, it means we could maneuver pretty well in the solar system, which would create some interesting possibilities, and I need to know more about that. But I don't blame all these crazy theories on the people that are putting them out so much. The government is the problem. They have created the truth vacuum. They have refused to allow this to go forward properly, and that allows people to sort of, connect the dots they want to connect. In other words, the government is just allowing us to run around in circles and chase butterflies and shadows because, if we're doing that, we're not putting much pressure on them. This is not the government I want. It's not the way I want to live. If I wanted to live that way, there's a lot of fine totalitarian states I could migrate to tomorrow. So it's got to stop. But no, the secret space program is not the way to disclosure, but the disclosure is the way to the secret space program.
Next question, Tom.
Rich Dolan. How are we to tell the difference between true disclosure and false flag disclosure?
Great question. And I'll just state that listening to some of the discussion here has made me really think that there actually could be a false flag ET type of situation that really could happen. For years I said, it's not going to happen. And the reason I kept thinking of the classical Project Bluebeam scenario, in which probably many of you have heard of this. So the idea being that there would be kind of a fake, like a holographic display of an alien invasion. And I've never signed on to that. I've just never thought that was logical or feasible for a lot of reasons. But a false flag, an ET false flag doesn't have to be a Bluebeam scenario at all. An ET false flag could be something like what Grant was talking about, which is that if disclosure is an inevitability, which at some point I think it will be, then you're going to want to spin that narrative to the maximum extent to defend your current hierarchical structure of power, which is what the U.S. national security structure is all about. And so, like, the CIA is never just going to walk away from the table and say, oh, here's all of our secrets, people. We've been keeping it for over 70 years, but now we're done. Like, that will never happen. So they will always seek to maintain control of the narrative, and there's always going to be deception and lies. There has to be, in my view, with any kind of disclosure. So when we're talking about truth and falsity and disclosure, there will have to be both. And it's going to be a real problem. Like, it's a real problem. Like, I don't know if I'm up to the task. I don't know if anyone here is truly up to the task of sifting out all of the lies that will be intertwined with the truths. You know, I think it was Alan Dulles, I think you said the best way to keep a secret is to pretend to share it. And I suspect we'll be dealing with that. So this is one researcher, I think it was Puthoff, who said to me, this is a hall of mirrors. And I think that's a very, very accurate statement. So I don't know if there's a good answer to this. I don't know if it's possible, to be perfectly honest with you. The only thing we can fall back on is the training that we have had. You know, if you've had intellectual training in understanding what constitutes valid evidence, then you have to use it. And don't just jump off into the first conclusion you arrive at. Take your time and do things the way that we all kind of know how to do, which is you analyze evidence the best way you can, and you make your best decision accordingly, because this is a very treacherous field. It's not easy. So we have to be careful. And we can't just assume we're going to get to the truth right away either.
Well, and the other thing is the best guard for us to prevent an alien invasion is they would want resources. We don't have any on this planet anymore. We're okay there. Go ahead, Tom.
Jonny, Enoch. Guys, Jonny, how do the ancient pyramids tie in with extraterrestrial life?
Okay. Well, earlier during my presentation, I was talking about the serpentine energy, ley lines, and different energies that go and move around the planet. The idea that the Great Pyramid, for example, is a tomb is total nonsense. It's based on a forgery, a Victorian age forgery that we say it belongs to Khufu or Khafres. We don't even know if anyone existed by that name. But the one thing is for certain, when you go in there, there's absolutely no hieroglyphics. It's magnificent. According to Chris Dunn, in his Giza power plant hypotheses, he said that it's built like a Faraday cage, you know, with the different layers. We see sandstone, limestone, granite. When you're in there, it's absolutely magnificent. And underneath the Giza plateau, we have these entire shafts and areas with like ports that it seems that there's some sort of heightened technology. For example, when Napoleon went there, he saw his Waterloo. He had an out-of-body experience. So I think that we're looking at a very advanced consciousness technology. For the most part, the different waves of Egyptians came in cycles of civilization, and they found it, and everyone wanted to become Egyptians. So it most certainly ties into a type of a serpentine technology that we can start tying into scalar energy with Tesla, that we could start tying into how our visitors are coming here.
Tom, this wonderful person had a quick question. She's been writing it out. Do you want to turn it to Tom, or do you just want to? You did. He's got it. Okay, good.
Okay, yeah, we've got it. Okay, so we have a special question, though, from Janet. Janet, can you go up to George, please? And George will give you the mic for a second. This is Jordan's mother.
Oh, well, hello there.
And I'll do any blurb.
Janet, everybody.
Okay,
Guys, can you give
we
me a little
had-
volume?
Oh, man.
We had to make an exception for my mother, so she wasn't expecting this.
No, I certainly wasn't, but I'm really not surprised that Jordan would kind of like to tease his mother. Oh.
My idea.
Well, for one thing, I've got to say right away, I'm kind of proud of my son.
Hey, Jordan.
So are we.
He was a very interesting young man to raise. And I'm not really surprised that he has embraced. Oh, I will get on
So
to
Janet,
this.
face the panel and ask which one you want to ask your question.
Oh, how delightful.
Oh, how nice, Johnny. So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you again.
In fact, all of you gentlemen, I must admit I didn't understand everything you said, but I was very impressed with how you said it, and thank you. Thank you so much. Let's see, I had a couple of questions. One of them was, as a Canadian, how far along are you with disclosure than we as your friends from the South?
You know, I wouldn't say that I'm the foremost authority on these particular topics. There's most certainly gentlemen on this stage that have been working and looking at the Canadian government for a long time at those sort of files. But from what I observe as a Canadian, I would say that Canadians are very open-minded. As you see, we have an audience full of these Canadians that are open-minded to these type of ideas. But I've never really seen any really strong efforts from our governments to really convince us that extraterrestrials are there, aside from talking to the Honorable Paul Hellyer. So.
Thank you. And then my next question was, I'm beginning to understand what Jordan has been so excited about, and I'm thinking about going home and talking to my friends about the possibility, the real possibility of ETs. And they're going to look at me and say, what are you talking about? You have been eating too much of that grass that it is that is now legal for us to grow. And I was trying to get some sort of an idea, and maybe some of you gentlemen, what do I say that they will really understand? What questions should I ask? What evidence should I give? Because it is a real problem. I would love to talk to them about what I am learning. How's that?
Well,
That's beautiful. Thank you. Janet Pease.
Janet.
George,
That's
George
a
is
fantastic
asking me to
question.
take this.
I really appreciate that question. None of this was scripted. This was all very impromptu.
George was asking me, I think, to answer.
Go ahead, answer that
And
question.
by the way,
Thank you. By the way, you're very
Mrs.
eloquent.
Jordan's mom, you are wonderful.
Absolutely.
It was so nice to see you and hear you. I have a mother too, and I love my mother, but I don't know if anyone would want her up on the stage in your play. Like, you did the perfect job. Mine's a little crazier than yours, Jordan.
She's still alive, by any
I
chance?
love my mother,
Okay.
but she would have been a totally different presence. So it's very, very nice.
This is being broadcast, you know that.
It's okay. It's all good. I would answer your question.
Richard's mother's from Europa, by the way, just so you know.
I would just say that there's actually a very good amount of very conservative evidence that shows not necessarily that UFOs are all alien, but there's a great deal of evidence, an overwhelming amount of evidence, to prove that the various governments and militaries of the world have really been interested in this and have engaged in this in a classified manner, while at the same time telling the public that there's nothing to it. And this goes for years and years and years. And we know this. This is not a matter of debate. It's objective. You could take it to the bank. So that we've been lucky in that there have been a large number of declassified documents. They haven't gotten much attention, but they're very important nonetheless, that were formally classified, that have shown violations of very sensitive airspace by objects described as disks. Well, that's interesting. By objects described as doing things that weren't supposed to be possible, but like instant acceleration and outperforming our best jet fighters and all of that. That's been going for years. And so all you could say at the very least is someone's got something that's not supposed to exist, and that's interesting. And then from there, you can say, is it alien? Is it not? What is it? That's when it really becomes interesting.
Or just tell them to watch some Ancient Aliens and get back to you. That's what you want to do, okay? I know that you remembered all that, but Ancient Aliens, so cool. A lot of it's not going to prove true, but they're all dead aliens. That's really kind of cool, and does nothing concerning about that. And Giorgio Tsoukalos is a very handsome guy, and they'll get back to you, and they'll go, hey, this sounds cool to me. And you can find them on YouTube if they don't have History Channel up here. They have a whole YouTube channel, Ancient Aliens. I just got on it, by the way, which is why I'm acting this way.
And
Go
of
ahead,
course,
Tom.
And of course, the conference, the former retired Congress people and senators that came to a set of hearings that Steve Bassett helped organize in Washington, D.C., where people came together, put together, the people who testified at that are extremely impressive. You know, there were military people there, government people, the chief investigator for the Federal Aviation Agency, the kind of witnesses that one would put on in a trial. That when I was representing Dr. John Mack at Harvard, we offered to put on sort of a grand rounds for Harvard University and started gathering together many of those same witnesses to put them on for the Harvard faculty so that they would understand this issue. So there's very credible evidence around, and in that conference that Steve put on, it's all on video and it's available. So what you should do is have your friends come over to your house and show them the video. And then they would say, so that's what Jordy's been doing, okay?
Can I make a suggestion? The way that it was done in December was you put it through the New York Times, and when the New York Times says it, it's okay. So you just take the New York Times article and you say, did you see this article? What do you think about this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's not fake news all the time. Tom, go ahead.
Let's go to Grant Cameron. Grant, in your mind, describe for us how disclosure will take place.
I think disclosure is revealing, and they're doing it as it goes along. I don't think there's any end date for it. I've heard 2024. I've heard different dates and stuff. But I think my impression, and I would just be speculating as to how it all ends, but I think they just keep dropping one more thing after another and just keep pushing it down the road like they're doing right now. I don't see any, I'm like with Richard, I don't think the president's going to stand up and sort of drop the bomb. They maybe get into a situation where Congress is forced to deal with the issue, as what the rumor is now, that they may be talking about this. And that's what I think they may have done, is to move it away from the executive branch. You put it through the New York Times, the pressure goes on Congress, and Congress now has to deal with it, and the executive branch is off the hook.
Temporarily.
Temporarily, yeah. But
Daniel.
as again, I don't know what's going to happen in the end. Who knows how it all unfolds? That's all speculation.
Okay, so you're right there. Daniel, tell us, is there a real involvement between the Vatican and ET life? And if so, explain how.
Well, yes, it's clear. As I mentioned in my presentation, the Vatican has actually held an official press conference specifically stating back in November of 2015 that they believe that in light of the discovery of more and more of these exoplanets, that very much sooner than anyone expected, we're going to discover that life exists elsewhere in the universe. And when I went and met with Father Jose Gabriel Funes, who had issued the statement for the Vatican, he acknowledged to me that they were talking about highly intelligent, highly technologically developed, but distinctly non-human civilization. That's what they're talking about. And so that the church is in the process now of mobilizing. As I mentioned, they've got a course that has been cleared through a Jesuit university down in Argentina to teach the course, to start rolling out answers to these philosophical and theological questions. So it's very clear that the Catholic Church, but you have to understand how they, Father Bill Davis, who was my superior at the Jesuit headquarters, used to say to me that, once something is publicly acknowledged, they'll always come out with a press conference saying, as the church has always taught. So what they're doing is they're doing all of the things right now that will enable them to say, yes, see, we told you so. But they are doing that. So there's very clearly a decision has been made, and it would have to have been made shared by Cardinal Turkson, Peter Turkson, who is the chair of the Pontifical Commission on Social Justice. He would have had to have agreed to it, and Francis himself would have had to agree to this. And I know that we've discussed it at Jesuit headquarters years ago, back in 1979. 77 actually. Our first sets of conversations about it at Jesuit headquarters were in 77. And Father Bill Davis authorized us to prepare policies on this, and we actually proposed it to the Washington Interreligious Staff Council, the heads of all 54 of the major religious denominations in the United States. We recommended the organizing of a task force to actually start preparing this. And so that came out of the Jesuits, and then we've been now in communication with the Vatican itself who has now moved into this position. So the answer is yes, they're definitely moving on that. But I'll hasten to point out that even when I was there at the Vatican in the meeting with them, they did not take me down into the Vatican library and show me the classified sections, which I asked them to do, actually, in 2 letters. They still declined to do that, but they have come forward with a press conference and statements now.
Daniel, were there ever discussions about Genesis at the Vatican that the fallen angels really might have been extraterrestrials?
Well, I don't know. I've not been involved in those conversations. I know that there's this outstanding request from the Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C. for access to the Vatican Library to determine what type of documentation there is there. And there's history of it because Copernicus and the others, even back then, there was a discussion then of them assuming that there must be other planets and that there must be other life out in space. There have been discussions about that, the many worlds theory, as is referred to in Catholic theology. So there's a lot of writing about it and discussions that have gone on in the Vatican. And I would assume, though I don't know, that they would have had to have acknowledged that there's data in the church that goes back for many, many hundreds of years, at least. So they've had plenty of time to discuss the relationship between a lot of the angelic references, et cetera, in the literature of the church and its relationship to potential extraterrestrials. But I don't know yet how that's developed yet. But we will know.
All right, Tommy, go ahead.
Okay, so this is for everybody. Maybe we can start with Steve and just go down the line. Tell us your favorite UFO case, its importance, and why.
Interesting. Well, I don't know about favorite, but the most important, as far as I'm concerned, politically and in terms of its power to move the needle, is the nuclear weapons tampering information. That's Robert Hastings' work. Some of the most important work ever done. Robert apparently is a little ill right now. I hope he's going to get better. They held a press conference in Washington. They brought the witnesses in. These are SAC-based officers. Many more have come forward and could come forward if we can get some things together on that. So you have captains and SAC-based officers with top clearances who are entrusted to launch our nuclear missiles in the event of an attack. They've come forward to say quite clearly that repeatedly, on many occasions, the craft have come down, hovered over the missile silos, and turned all the missiles off. Numbers of times, and they've done it in Russia. And they may still be doing it. We had a case not too long ago where a bunch of missiles went down. Of course, the government says that was just a computer glitch, and I'm going, computer glitch? That's the most important. These are the most important cases, and Robert Hastings deserves the credit for making that very well known.
Richard Dolan.
I liked Steve's answer, by the way. There were a series of very interesting missile incursion cases along the U.S.-Canadian border back in the late 60s and mid-70s. But actually, George asked me that question once on Coast. And the answer I gave then is one I still might give now. Of the U.S. cases, there's one Soviet I want to give to, but of the U.S. cases, I would say the 1976 Iranian, this is not really a U.S. case, the Iranian jet interceptor case of September of 1976. I mean, Iran was a U.S. ally, and the United States was actually kind of involved in this. But really what happened was, over the city of Tehran, this is back in the days of the Shah, citizens saw a bright, unusual object in the sky. They called Mehrabat Airport in Tehran. The traffic controller at first blew these calls off, thought they were ridiculous, looks out and he says, oh, that's what they're looking at. Called the Royal Iranian Air Force, which sent 2 F-4 fighter interceptors successively to investigate and intercept. Both of these jet fighters encountered the object visually and on radar. The radar return was significant, was quite large. In one of the cases, the pilot was ready to launch a missile at the object. The electronics went offline as he was about to do that. The object at one point detached a smaller object that went at one of the F-4s on an intercept. The pilot turned to evade. The smaller object turned inside his arc and joined the mothership at the perfect rejoin. And we know, here's why it's interesting. The case itself is amazing, right? But But what's amazing is the documentation we have on it. This is in the glory era of the first blush of the Freedom of Information Act in the 70s. It comes out. It's a 3-page, single-space type documentation on it.
Great case. Go ahead, Tom.
Jonny Enoch, given that we are in Canada, are Canadians more receptive to disclosure than, say, Americans?
I don't know. I think Americans have a very open mind. From most of the people I talk to, I don't know whether it's television and movies and culture and Steven Spielberg movies, which are kind of ubiquitous anyways. They're all around the world. But I tend to think that Canadians are pretty receptive to extraterrestrials as long as they drink Tim Hortons and like maple syrup and I don't know, maybe all those sort of things. But I don't know. I think everybody is sort of opening their minds around the world, and I think that's wonderful with events like this that are happening.
Well, and one of the big things for Canada is the great Paul Hellyer.
Yeah,
The guy is fantastic,
absolutely.
isn't he? Former defense minister, and he says it the way he sees it. I think the world, what is he, like 90 years old now? Something like
More.
that?
Yeah, he's incredible.
It's like
Just
94
amazing.
or 90,
Lots
94,
of
95.
energy. Go ahead with the one more, Tom.
So this is for Grant Cameron. Grant, why are certain people chosen to see UFO sightings and some aren't? Is it the ETs that are choosing who can see them?
Okay. That goes a little bit to a download I had a couple years ago. We're making assumptions. If it's one life, it's one life. If it's multiple lives, it's a whole different world. So if you bring in reincarnation, then you look at whether an abduction is a soul contract, whether we're agreeing, and that's where I sort of see everything in ufology, where I get into consciousness. It really doesn't matter what happens out there, what the government does or whatever. All you have to do is figure out if you believe in reincarnation, what am I doing here, and what am I supposed to be doing, and am I doing it, and everything else is irrelevant. It doesn't really matter what anybody else does. So when it comes to the UFO sightings, that's what I say with UFOs. Why do they have lights on them? They have lights so you can see them. You're part of the game if you see a UFO, because when they abduct people, nobody sees anything. And so I think that the world is a lot less random than people think it is. And my initial sighting, we were going to go. I had no interest in UFOs. I had interest in paranormal phenomena, and I did a study on dying people in hospitals and stuff like that. I was into weird stuff, but we were going to go, and then we didn't go for 3 months. And then what happened was the local TV station was going to, trying to film it. And they were out there, and I didn't realize this for 35 years, that suddenly it made sense what had happened. They were there, and they had this thing on the ground, and they had been out the night before. They tried to capture this thing on the ground. And they went back, and the news director said, this is garbage, nobody's going out again, I'm not paying any more overtime, you can go on your own time. So they took a volunteer crew from CKY TV in Winnipeg, and the guy who was running the camera was not even he'd never shot a camera before in his life. He was a film editor. So he's sitting there, and this object is rising up and going down, getting brighter, going down, and it's at the end of the road. And he said, the next time this thing brightens up, they didn't get anything last night, next time this thing brightens up, I'm going to shoot the camera. And so he just went, and as soon as he shot the camera, this thing jumped 5,000 feet in the air in 3 frames. And it became a viral film. NBC picked it up. And it wasn't until 35 years later I suddenly realized, like, this wasn't random. This thing jumped just as he pushed the camera. And then I started to think bizarrely that maybe that, and that was the only reason I went out. The next night I said, come on, let's go see what's going on. And that's what pushed me out. I would never have gone, I would never have gotten involved in UFOs if they had not had this bizarre incident with the camera. So to me, everything is a lot less random than people think it is.
You know, if we had a chance to talk to extraterrestrials, the one question I would ask them for sure would be if they believe in God. And I wonder what their answer would be. I suspect it would be, we're trying to find out the answer to that, just like all of us, I think. And so, Stephen, as we wrap up this panel, if disclosure comes, or when disclosure comes, what will you be saying on Coast to Coast and other media that day?
Oh, I'm going to be on Coast to Coast that day.
Probably. You're already booked. We just don't have the date.
I do owe you. I do owe you. Well, I mean, first I'll be ordering cases of champagne on eBay and planning my post-disclosure party, some foreign land. Boy, I haven't been asked that question. Well, look.
I think you'll break down. And I'm not saying that mentally. I mean emotional.
I don't
This guy
break
has
down
been
very
at
often,
this
George.
for 20 plus years.
It's possible.
I
It's
think
possible.
you will get very emotional when they come out and say that we have been visited.
I will probably get emotional. Look, the "I told you so" thing is going to be incredibly tempting, but I've told myself I'm not going to do an "I told you so" tour. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody. Never tells anybody "I told you so," right? Which is like, you're going to do it anyway. But I'm going to express. If I'm on your show, I'll be expressing gratitude to all of the people that have helped make this happen. Not the least of which is Art Bell, you, and countless other, certainly, hosts of the alternative media who've let me on nearly 1,200 times because I never say no. That's part of the reason, and also the researchers and everyone else that this has finally been achieved. Because I'm quite certain that if it wasn't for this massive effort that's now really 70 years on, but intensely since 1990, the government would probably have stretched this out. And Danny, I don't want to disappoint you, but you're going to see disclosure in your lifetime, and probably within a couple of years. So get ready for that, okay?
Well, I plan to be here 10 years from now. I'm not.
But you were talking 15 years, sir. I mean, come on.
Even 15 years, I'll still be here.
2020. That's what I'll be. I mean,
but it'll probably be shorter than that.
First,
shorter than that.
I'll be expressing a lot of gratitude because, believe me, this has been an extraordinary time, and a lot of people, huge numbers of people involved, and they really tough. When the government is saying something doesn't even exist, and you're trying to move it forward, there's a lot more sacrifice, I think, in this particular issue than was necessary, and that's what I'll be doing.
Richard Dolan, you have one question to ask an extraterrestrial.
Oh, I wanted to answer his question.
I already answered
right.
the God question.
I have one question to ask an extraterrestrial.
Yep. What would that be?
Wow. What's your? Yeah. Here's my question.
I'm baffling all these guys today.
What is your best philosopher, and what does your best philosopher have to say about the nature of the cosmos?
Yes.
I think that's what I would like to know.
It's a missed opportunity, though.
Yeah, that's just like, it's a waste of time.
You're supposed to ask them, have you seen my books?
No, I would like, honestly, if I were really doing this seriously, I was going to ask, what's your kind of emotional disposition? Because I'm really curious about their emotional lives. Because we never really ask about that. But I think I'm interested in their intellectual imagination and their best and highest philosophy. They must have one. And I would be interested in what that is.
What if their answer is, your arm doesn't taste as tender as I thought it would?
I'll be like, that's very good news. We eat a lot of crap, so keep it in mind, extraterrestrials. We're not that tasty anymore.
You just roll down the window and point them to the grass.
I would just like to answer a little bit what Steve was. Just Steve's answer was good. My answer would be, if I were to ask, like on the day of disclosure, what I would want to do, I would still be curious because I'm sure disclosure is going to be messy. Like there's going to be a lot of unanswered questions. And for me, I'm interested in this field not because ultimately I'm interested in solving problems. I mean, that would be nice. I'm interested in this field because I'm curious. I just have a curiosity about it, and I like exploring it. Like I find it fascinating, and if I don't solve it and I don't fix all the problems, then that makes me like everyone else has ever lived. Like, I'm not going to fix all the problems. It would be nice to get a disclosure. But for me, I just have this curiosity, and I'll always be exploring it. So when there's a disclosure, that's like another stage in the game, and that just means for me there's just going to be more questions, more things to look into, and I'll just keep doing that as long as I can do it.
And Johnny, how about you? When disclosure comes, what do you say that day?
What I would be saying that day, George, and I'm glad you asked me that because I was going to pull a Richard and actually defer back to the Stephen question and try to steal it as well. I want to thank each and every single person that's here, because when disclosure happens, you are going to be the educators. You're going to be the people that everyone comes to when they're scrambling and they're saying, oh my goodness, this theology doesn't make sense, or this political aspect doesn't make sense. This is going to be a process when each and every single one of us are a part of it. And that's why it's happening the way that it is. It's no coincidence that you're here today. You are the architects of the new paradigm, and this is a part of it. So that's what I think.
Grant Cameron.
Well, to me, my philosophy is that everything is a card dealt to you. So when the December 16th thing happened, I considered that to be disclosure, because I say disclosure is to reveal. If you get full disclosure where they actually say ETs are here, or however they phrase it, it's still going to be another card, because I agree with Richard that it's going to be a very messy deal. You may have this, we're going to go to war with them, or you could be all sorts of scenarios. It's not going to end. That's not the end of the story. It's just another card that's dealt. It's a very complex issue. Why are they here? What are they doing? What do they believe? It just goes to the next question.
And Mr. Sheehan, what do you say?
Well,
when
I
disclosure's announced?
would ask them the question that you said, that you asked, is what exactly, how do they in their culture deal with the relationship between the physiology of the universe and the infinite and eternal sea of consciousness from which it came? And do they believe that's the story? And do they relate to that type of infinite and eternal consciousness as a mode of ethical reasoning?
I've interviewed hundreds of physicists on Coast to Coast. I ask them all that same question. How did the Big Bang start? Not one can give me an answer.
Right.
Not one. Folks, we've got a meet and greet in less than 2 hours right outside here. We're going to have some music and fun and cocktails, so make sure everybody comes around. Let's hear it for Steve Bassett, Richard Dolan, Jonny Enoch. You're picking me up at 7.
Yes, airport. That's right.
Grant Cameron, Daniel Sheehan. Great panel. And to all of you, thank you. And enjoy the rest of the conference.